Hello, Mayflower. We are doing Holy Week differently this year. What we are going to do is I will be reading from this book by Francis Spufford. It's entitled Unapologetic: Why, Despite Everything, Christianity Can Still Make Surprising Emotional Sense. It's a long title, wonderful book. And I'm going to read this, and we'll also have music interspersed within the story. So come with me now into the chapel where we will have our story time. Imagine a human being, then. It's the man from the crowd, but he hasn't arrived there yet. Imagine a human being in whom the overwhelming, all-at-once perspective of the God of everything is not a momentary glimpse from which he rebounds, reeling, but a continual presence which in him is somehow adapted to the scale of the human mind, so that for him, uniquely, the shining is not other but self, so that he sees the world at every moment with the tenderness of its creator. Imagine the place he has come to, the place he has been born into, is a province of the empire that controls pretty much the whole known world. The occupiers are much too strong. Even tucked away in their barracks, the people know they are there. Enormous, brawny thugs with bare knees, backed up by superb organization, matchless military technology, the wealth of the whole world. Low-level terrorism flourishes, followed by example-setting public executions. That spring, the tension gets especially bad, and also at festivals which are supposed to celebrate things being right and make it feel much worse that they aren't. The soldiers are jumpy and resentful too. They don't like it here. Into this setting comes Jesus with the love song to all that is ringing continually in him. He says, God wants more than kin-loving kin. God wants more than the natural bonds. God wants more than biology. God wants our love to do more than run around the tight circle of our self-interest, more even that it should run around the wider circle of our altruism, if altruism means we get some kind of roundabout payback for love in the end. God, he says, wants us to love wildly and without calculation. God wants us to love people we don't even like, people we hate, people who hate us.
Give
And Jesus talks about the kingdom all the time, every day, almost every hour. When he talks about it, he skips from analogy to analogy, keeping all its power as heart's desire and humiliation's remedy, but sliding ever onward, impossible to pin down as a political plan. Jesus' kingdom apparently exists in ever-changing resemblances. He does not say what it is, only what it is like. It's like a tiny seed. It's like a big tree, like something inside you, like a pearl you'd give everything to possess, like wheat growing among weeds, like the camel climbing through the needle's eye, like the way the world looks to children, like a servant making good use of the master's money, like getting a day's pay for an hour's work, like a crooked magistrate who has fixed the case in your favor, like a narrow gate, a difficult road, a lamp on a stand, like a wedding party where all the original guests have been disinvited and replaced by random passers-by, like yeast in dough, like a treasure, like a harvest, like a door that opens whenever you knock, or like a door you have to bang on for hours in the middle of the night until a grumpy neighbor wakes up and lends you a loaf. The kingdom is whatever all those likenesses have in common. The kingdom, he seems to be saying, is something that can only be glimpsed in comparisons, because the world contains no actual example of it. And yet the world glints and winks and shines everywhere with the possibility of it.
We are many parts, we are all one body, and the gifts we have, we are given to share. May the Spirit of love make us one indeed, one the love that we share, one our hope in despair, one the cross that we bear.
Jesus teaches and heals in the countryside and in the small towns, but now, at last, he turns toward the one city. He and his friends make for the dry yellow town on the desert hill where the empire's governor keeps the uneasy peace with the authorities of the one temple. It's where this story was always going. It's where a Christus, Messiah, would have to declare himself. It's where power is. It's where the religion of the God of everything has its focus. It is the place where actions stop being provisional, experimental, retrievable, and become definite, final. It's where this drama, wherever it is, must find its ending. They arrive at the walls, but it's too late in the evening for the entrance Jesus has in mind, so they wait till the next day in the straggly settlement outside the gates. Then in they go, Jesus and the nucleus of 20 or so men and women who have been following him about. The narrow stone streets are packed with visitors who've come in from the province for the biggest festival of the year, a festival of death averted, in which the people of the one God remember how God saved them by smiting the rest. And the visitors see, well, something like a parade, with Jesus riding on a borrowed donkey, and the friends around him shouting, "Make way, make way!" Who's this? It's another bloody prophet. It's that crazy preacher who says we don't need the law. It's the rabbi from up north who heals people. What? The river-dipping one? No, he's dead. This is the other one. It's a king. Rubbish. Kings ride on horses, not donkeys. But there are prophecies about donkeys. Maybe he's the one. Oh, come on. This fellow, where's his sword? It's not the king. It's the king. It's the king. Keep your voice down, idiot. Better get the children indoors, just in case. Is it a king? The scene is hard to read. It's like a royal progress and a parody of a royal progress all at once. Jesus is doing exactly what a Christos would do if he were making a momentum play, gambling on snowballing crowd support. Yet the details are off script somehow, from the donkey to the way that only some of the friends seem to be shouting the slogans you'd expect, to the way that the man himself doesn't have his face set in the shining megawatt mask of charisma. It isn't clear what's happening, but something is. And though only a portion of the crowd are young enough, or hopeful enough, or desperate enough, or unwary enough to give Jesus their acclaim, quite a lot of them are curious enough to follow and see what comes next. For the parade or procession or whatever it is clearly heading for the temple, up the twisting alleyways to the top of the city and the narrow gateway where the press of yellow house walls and tile roofs open out all at once into the wide forecourt of the one God's most sacred place. The two guards on duty let the mob through without a word. Those kinds of numbers are their own permission. But they send a runner quick to the chief priest's office, and he, looking down from his window, sees a human flood pouring out suddenly from the entry point to fill the flagstones of the courtyard and jostle against the pens where the animals are kept. In the midst of the flood, a man is getting off a donkey. The chief priest has seen bigger crowds, but this one is quite big enough to do some damage if things turn ugly. Uh-oh, he thinks, and sends a runner of his own to the governor. Jesus looks around. He sees the doves in their wicker cages, and the half-grown spring lambs in their straw, and the nervous cattle sidling, kept perpetually antsy by the smell of blood that drifts out of the temple's doors. He sees the money change stalls where, before you can even buy your animal for the sacrifice, you have to swap the emperor's dirty coinage for the temple's own clean currency, good nowhere else. He sees the whole apparatus for keeping this one little walled acre of ground separate from the compromised, colonized world outside. And he begins to shout. Do you call this pure? Do you think any of this keeps you clean? Do you think any of this keeps that at bay? Waving his arms out at the city, the hills, the entire empire. Nothing is pure. This is the house of the loving Father who welcomes home his lost children. This is the house of my Father and your Father. Do you think you can sell his forgiveness? Do you think there is a price for peace with him? It cannot be bought. It cannot be sold. It can only be given. These are thieves. They promise you are buying what can only be given. God gives freely. Tear down the temple, and God will still give you all you need. And in a kind of frenzy, Jesus starts yanking at the timbers of the nearest stall. The board serving as a counter gives way, and little piles of silver go spinning and clinking onto the paving slabs, followed by the dealer in a diving crouch. Here we go, thinks the chief priest, and he hopes that the squads of soldiers the governor will have sent in the nearby streets understand that they must not enter the temple to quell the riot. But the crowd don't join in. Jesus hasn't pressed their buttons. He's here at the heart of what matters to them, and if he'd said the right things, if he'd filled them with enough righteous wrath to overcome their fears, the city could have been his. At least until the governor brought up violence's trained professionals. But he didn't. He ranted inexplicably about a bit of the temple scene everyone knows has to be there, and he said something threatening about the precious building. They don't join in. They don't want to join in. They just look at him, and then, muttering, they start to drain back out of the yard. Jesus has not sparked the uprising. All he has done is to mark himself out in authority's eyes as a menace. The chief priest would have him arrested now, if he could, but Jesus' friends are escorting him away in the retreating crowd. And it wouldn't do to inflame things just when they're dying down nicely. Finding him again in the warren of yellow alleys will be a problem. But an hour later, the chief priest has a piece of luck. When one of the friends comes back with a tip-off about where they're planning to be that night. "He isn't what I thought," the man says, furious and betrayed.
Now in this banquet, Christ is our bread. Here shall all hungers be fed. Bread that is broken, wine that is poured. Love is the sign of our Lord.
The evening sees Jesus and the friends celebrating the festival in a borrowed upstairs room. His mood is strange, and they keep looking at him, perturbed, as they eat the roast lamb and yeastless bread and bitter herbs, and they share the cup of wine and tell the story of how the one God long ago brought God's people out of captivity. He doesn't seem like a person whose plans have failed. He is not confused or despondent at all. Yet, he is full of trembling intensity. Everything he says seems deliberate and effortful, as if this dinner in lieu of a revolution were a part of something terrifying he was making himself do, step by step, word by word, action by action. After supper, he does something that isn't in the festival ritual. He picks up one of the flat loaves they haven't touched yet. "This is my body," he says, and he snaps it in half using both hands. He asks for the wine cup. "This is my blood," he says. "Do this when you remember me." It's one of those likeness things again. But the friends don't think too hard about what he means, because they're bursting out with anxiety at the finality of the way he's talking. Remember you? Where are you going? We won't leave you. Don't worry about today. It doesn't matter. We won't leave you, teacher. But they do. A few hours later, in the dark, on the open ground at the edge of the city, where they're camped out, a patrol of temple guards find them. And the friends, looking to Jesus for guidance and getting none, hesitate, waver, and run for it, leaving him alone in custody.
Rejoice.